The hall of the royal palace was filled with bright light and the sound of many voices. People from the court gathered in long rows, their eyes fixed on the throne where the young princess sat. She was dressed in silver, her hair shining like the morning sun, and her eyes were sharp and proud. Her name was Evelyn, and she was known for speaking boldly, never holding back her words. That day, she stood before the gathered men of the empire. Her voice carried through the hall as she laughed at them. She spoke of how none had true courage. No man would dare step forward to prove his strength in the most feared place known to all. She raised her hand and pointed toward the great doors of the palace, as if pointing to the fiery lands beyond. With a smile that carried both beauty and cruelty, she said that any man who could survive a single night in the fire plains would own her forever. The court gasped at her words, for the fire plains were spoken of with fear. No one had ever returned from a night within them alive. Her words echoed in the grand chamber, heavy with challenge. Many of the noblemen lowered their eyes. Some whispered among themselves, others laughed nervously. They admired the princess, but none wished to risk certain death for her taunt. Evelyn's lips curved into a mocking smile. She enjoyed watching them hesitate, enjoyed the power her words carried. From the back of the hall, a voice rose.
Ow!
It was calm, not loud, but steady enough to silence the room. A young soldier stepped forward. He was not dressed in rich robes, nor did he carry the air of noble birth. His name was Ethan. He had no title, no grand past, and to many in that hall he was invisible until that very moment. He walked with quiet strength and stopped at the center of the room. His eyes met the princess without fear. The people turned, surprised that someone so plain would answer such a dangerous challenge. A murmur swept through the court. Some shook their heads, thinking him foolish. Others smirked, waiting to see him humiliated. The princess tilted her head, her golden crown glinting in the torchlight, and studied him with interest. Ethan spoke with steady words. He said he would accept her taunt. He said he would face the fire plains for one night. The hall fell into silence, the weight of his vow pressing down on all who listened. For a long moment the princess did not speak. Then her laugh filled the air, clear and sharp like glass breaking. She told him that by his own words he had sealed his fate, that the plains would swallow him by nightfall. She repeated her cruel promise, her tone sharp with mockery. If he lived, he would own her forever. The court erupted with noise, some clapping at her daring words, others whispering in disbelief, but Ethan did not waver. He bowed his head once, a gesture of respect, and then turned to leave the hall. His steps echoed against the stone floor as he walked away, every eye upon him. The nobles laughed at his back, certain they would never see him again. The princess watched him go, her smile fading slightly, though none in the hall noticed. As the heavy doors closed behind him, silence settled in the chamber. The fire plains waited beyond the palace walls, a land of storms and fire, a place no man had survived. And yet against every reason, Ethan had chosen to walk into them. The night that awaited would test not only his strength, but the truth behind the princess's careless taunt. The court returned to its talk, voices buzzing like restless bees. But somewhere in that grand hall, a feeling grew that something had changed. A common man had dared to rise, and by morning, the empire itself might never be the same. The sun began to fall as Ethan prepared to step into the fire plains. The gates of the city opened slowly, and beyond them stretched a land that seemed to burn even under the fading light. The sky glowed with red clouds, and the ground was cracked with streams of glowing stone that ran like rivers. The air was hot, thick, and heavy. Soldiers stood at the walls watching him leave, some shaking their heads as if already mourning him. The people whispered his name, but most believed they would never see him alive again. Ethan carried only a small blade and a simple shield pack that hummed softly with a faint blue light. It was enough to keep the heat at bay for a time, but it would not last forever. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, each footfall echoing against the stone. Behind him, the gates shut with a deep sound that shook the ground. He was now alone. The land was silent, except for the hiss of steam rising from cracks in the earth. Strange shapes moved in the distance, their glowing eyes flickering like sparks. Ethan kept his steps slow and careful. His training as a soldier had taught him patience, but he knew this was unlike any field he had ever crossed. Every shadow might hide danger, every sound might mean his end. Back in the palace, Evelyn stood at a tall window, her eyes on the far horizon where the fire plains stretched. She had not expected anyone to take her words so seriously, yet now she watched as one man walked into the storm without fear. Her lips curved in a faint smile, but her heart felt a strange weight she did not understand. Around her, nobles whispered, waiting for word of Ethan's fall. She said nothing, her gaze locked on the darkness beyond. As night came, the fire plains grew even more dangerous. Flames burst from the ground without warning. The heat pressed against Ethan like a wall. His shield flickered, warning him that its power was draining too quickly. He searched for cover and found a shallow cave cut into black stone. Inside, the air was cooler, though still heavy with smoke. He rested for a moment, drinking from the small water flask he had brought. He knew he could not stop for long. Suddenly, a sound echoed outside the cave. It was a low growl, deep and rough, followed by the scrape of claws on stone. Ethan tightened his grip on the blade. A creature stepped into view, its body large and built for the harsh land, its eyes glowing bright orange. His teeth shone in the firelight. Ethan rose to his feet slowly, his heart steady. He did not rush, for rushing meant death. The beast moved closer, each step shaking the ground. Ethan held his blade ready, his mind calm. When the creature lunged, Ethan rolled aside. Heat scorched his arm as its claws struck the stone. He slashed at its leg, drawing a sharp cry from it. The fight was quick but fierce. Ethan used the broken rocks around him, forcing the beast into tight spaces where its size was its weakness. At last, with one final strike, he brought it down. He stood over the fallen creature, his chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. His arm bled from a cut, but he was still alive. Far away in the royal hall, word reached the court through the scouts, who watched from the cliffs. Murmurs spread quickly. He had faced one of the beasts of the plains, and survived. Some laughed and said it was only luck. Others frowned, wondering if perhaps this man was not so ordinary after all. Evelyn heard their voices, but said nothing. She turned her eyes back to the window, her thoughts her own. In the cave, Ethan wrapped his wound with a strip of cloth torn from his shirt. He leaned against the wall, listening to the crackle of fire outside and the far-off cries of other beasts. The night was far from over. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting his breath steady, then rose once more.
House.
He knew he had many more hours to face before dawn. The fire plains waited, and only his will would decide if he lived to see the morning light. The night grew darker as Ethan pushed deeper into the fire plains. The air was thick with smoke and heat, and the ground shook at times as if the earth itself was alive. Sparks floated in the air like fireflies, but they burned when they touched the skin. Ethan's shield flickered again, warning that its strength was failing. He tightened the strap of his pack and pressed on, knowing that if the shield died completely, the heat alone might end him. He reached a broken ridge that looked out over a wide valley. Rivers of glowing stone flowed through it, twisting like snakes of fire. Across the valley, strange machines moved in the distance, their bodies tall and sharp like walking towers. Their glowing lights scanned the ground as they moved slowly, as if hunting. Ethan crouched low behind the rocks, his eyes following their steps. He had been trained to face soldiers, but these machines were something far worse. They never tired, they never feared, and they were built only to destroy. He studied them for a long time, then made his way down the ridge, keeping to the shadows. Every step was careful, every breath slow. Once a machine turned in his direction, and the bright beam of its light passed across the rocks. Ethan pressed himself flat against the ground, his heart pounding as the light swept past him. Only when it moved away did he rise and continue. Back at the palace, the nobles gathered around Evelyn, eager to know how far the soldier had gone. Scouts brought word that he had crossed into the valley and that the machines had been seen near him. Many laughed and said his death was near. Some mocked the very idea that he had lasted this long. Evelyn listened in silence, her eyes never leaving the window. She would not admit it, but a part of her wanted him to succeed, though she did not understand why. In the valley, Ethan's path grew harder. The machines marched closer, and he knew he could not outrun them. He looked around and saw a bridge of stone stretching across the glowing river. The bridge was cracked and weak, but it was his only chance. He stepped onto it quickly, the heat rising from below burning against his skin. Behind him, the machines had seen him. Their heavy steps shook the ground as they gave chase. The bridge began to crumble under his feet. Ethan ran, stones breaking and falling away into the fire beneath him. A beam of light struck the rock near him, exploding it into dust. He shielded his face and pushed forward, his legs burning with effort. At the last moment, as the bridge gave way, he leaped across the final gap and rolled onto the other side. The machines reached the broken edge and stopped, their heavy bodies unable to follow. Ethan lay on the ground, his breath ragged, but he was alive. From her high window, Evelyn was told that the soldier had crossed the burning river and escaped the machines. The court erupted in shouts, some angry, some amazed. Many said it was impossible, yet he had done it. Evelyn's lips parted in surprise, and for a moment her proud mask slipped. She turned away from the court so no one would see her face. Ethan rose and pressed on. His shield was nearly gone, its blue light weak and dim. Its water was almost finished, and his arm still burned from the earlier wound. But his eyes stayed forward. He had no thought of giving up. Every step he took was a step toward the dawn. At last, he reached a wide field, filled with broken stone pillars. The ground was uneven, and the air shimmered with heat. He paused to rest, his body heavy with pain. Then he heard the slow scrape of something massive moving through the pillars. A shadow stretched across the ground, long and terrible. A beast larger than the one he had faced before stepped into view, its body covered in black armor, its eyes like burning coals. Ethan raised his blade, his breath slow and steady. The trial was not over. The night had more to give, and he would meet it with every bit of strength left in him. The beast moved slowly between the pillars, its heavy steps shaking the ground. Its black hide glowed faintly where the firelight touched it, and its eyes burned red in the night. Ethan gripped his blade tighter, every muscle in his body tense. His wound throbbed, his shield was almost gone, and his water was gone completely. Yet he did not back away. He knew there was no path but forward. The beast let out a roar that rolled across the plains, making the stones tremble. Birds of fire rose into the sky and vanished into the smoke. Ethan's mind was clear. He had no plan but to endure. The beast lunged, claws striking down where he had been. Ethan rolled across the ground, heat searing his side. He rose and struck with his blade, sparks flying as it scraped against the creature's armor. The strike did little, but it proved he would not flee. The fight dragged on, each moment pressing him closer to his limits. Ethan darted between the pillars, using them to shield himself from the beast's claws. He waited, watched, and struck when he could, each cut small but steady. The ground split where the beast struck, fire bursting upward. Sweat ran into Ethan's eyes, but he refused to falter. His strength was not in speed or in power, but in the will that kept him standing. At last he saw his chance. A tall pillar leaned to the side, cracked at its base. He moved toward it, forcing the beast to follow. He made it strike again, stepping aside at the last second. The beast's claws smashed into the stone, breaking the pillar free. With a groan, the massive rock tilted and crashed down onto the beast's back. The ground shook as dust and flame rose into the air. Ethan fell to his knees, gasping for breath, as the beast gave one final cry before it stilled. His arm shook as he lowered his blade, his body near its end. Far away, the court listened to reports carried back from the scouts. The story spread quickly. He had faced the great beast of the pillars and lived. Many in the court grew restless. Some said no man could survive so much without help from the gods. Others whispered that the vow made by the princess might soon bind her to a common soldier. Evelyn heard it all, her face calm but her heart unsteady. She turned her gaze again to the far horizon. For the first time she felt fear, not for her pride, but for the man she had mocked. Ethan leaned against a broken stone, his chest rising and falling with slow breaths. He tore another strip of cloth from his shirt and bound the cut on his side. His vision blurred, but when he looked up, the stars shone through the smoke above him. He remembered his home, the fields where he once worked before he became a soldier. He remembered the quiet strength of his father, the gentle voice of his mother, and the simple life he had left behind. Those memories gave him the strength to rise once more. The night pressed on, woke through the ruins, every step heavy but steady. Strange whispers filled the air, the sound of wind moving through broken stone. The fireplanes tested him with silence as much as with danger. His mind grew heavy with weariness, yet he kept moving on. Dawn was still hours away, but he had no thought of surrender. At the palace, the nobles began to argue. Some said Ethan should be brought back, that enough had been proven. Others said the vow must be carried through, that if he could endure until morning, the empire itself must honor his claim. Evelyn stood apart from them all. She thought of the words she had spoken, the mocking smile she had worn. She realized that if he lived, it would not be her who owned him, but he who had already owned her pride with his strength. Ethan climbed a final ridge as the stars faded slightly above him. His shield gave a final flicker and died, leaving him fully open to the heat. He felt it burn against his skin, but he pressed on. His legs shook, his arms trembled, yet his eyes stayed fixed on the far line of the sky. The night was ending, though it felt like it would never end. Every breath was pain. Every step was a battle, but he did not stop. The fireplanes had thrown all they could at him, and still he walked. Somewhere beyond the smoke, the first light of morning waited. The first light of morning touched the edge of the fireplanes. The dark sky began to fade into gray, and the glow of the rivers of fire softened. Ethan stood on the ridge, his body weak, his skin burned, his clothes torn. His shield was gone, his water gone, his blade chipped and dull, yet he still stood. His eyes were fixed on the horizon as the sun slowly began to rise. The long night was ending. The gates of the city opened with the sound of horns. Scouts who had watched the plains all night rushed back with the news, told the court that Ethan had survived until dawn. The words spread like fire through the palace. Nobles shouted in disbelief, some with anger, some with awe. They said it was impossible, yet he had done it. Evelyn heard the words and felt her heart tremble. She had spoken a vow, mocking and proud, and now it was real. The people gathered on the walls to see him. First they saw only smoke, then a lone figure walking slowly toward the city. His steps were heavy, but he did not fall. When he came closer, they could see his wounds, his weary face, and the quiet strength in his eyes. A silence fell over the crowd. No one laughed now, no one mocked. They watched him with respect, for they knew they were seeing something they would never forget. Ethan reached the gates. Soldiers hurried to meet him, but he waved them aside. He walked into the city on his own feet, refusing to be carried. Every step was a sign that he had endured. The nobles, who had once laughed, now lowered their heads. The court gathered in the great hall, waiting for him to appear. When the doors opened and Ethan stepped inside, the hall grew silent. Evelyn rose from her throne. Her crown shone in the morning light, but her face was not proud now. She looked at him and felt a weight of shame for her taunt, yet also a strange feeling of respect she had never known. Her voice was steady, but softer than it had ever been in the hall. She told him that he had survived the night, that he had claimed what she had promised. The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Ethan looked at her, his face calm, though his body trembled with pain. He told her he did not seek to own her. He said he had not endured the fire plains for pride or for power, but to show that a man without title, without wealth, could face what others feared. He said he sought only respect for those who were often unseen, those who worked and fought quietly without reward. His words filled the hall, and many lowered their eyes in shame. The nobles whispered among themselves, shocked by his answer. They had expected him to boast, to demand the throne, or to claim the princess as his prize. Instead, he had shown humility greater than any of them. Evelyn stepped down from her throne and stood before him. She lowered her head, not as a queen to a subject, but as a person to another. She told him that he had already gained more than ownership. He had gained honor, and with it her heart. The court could not deny what had happened. The vow had been spoken, the trial endured, and the truth revealed. Ethan was no longer a common soldier in their eyes. He was a symbol of strength, of will, and of the spirit that could not be broken. His name would be carried through the empire as the man who faced the fire plains and returned. As the day rose higher, the people filled the streets with cheers. They called his name not as a servant, but as a hero. Ethan stood at the gates once more, looking out at the land he had conquered not with power, but with endurance. Evelyn stood beside him, her eyes no longer filled with pride alone, but with something deeper. Together, they faced the rising sun, knowing that the empire would never be the same again. The night of trial was over, but the story of Ethan and Evelyn was only beginning. It would be told for generations, a tale of courage, humility, and the power of one man's will against the impossible.